When Caleb Walker opens the letter confirming his bride's arrival, he dreams of companionship after years of crushing loneliness on the Montana frontier. But when the stagecoach door swings open in the spring of 1883, the woman who steps down carries more than a traveling bag. She carries secrets written in purple bruises across her pale skin, and a desperate need for sanctuary that will test everything Caleb thought he knew about marriage, protection, and the true meaning of home. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Evelyn and Caleb's story travels. And if this beginning grabbed you, hit that like button and settle in for their complete journey. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, carried by a postal rider who looked half frozen despite the tentative warmth of early April. Caleb Walker stood in the doorway of his cabin, the envelope trembling slightly in his work-roughened hands, and for the first time in 3 years, he allowed himself to feel something dangerously close to hope. The paper was good quality, better than anything he'd touched in months. The handwriting was precise, official, the kind that came from city offices where ink didn't freeze in winter and people wore clean collars every day. He'd read it 4 times already, but his eyes traced the words again anyway, as if repetition might make them more real. Mr. Caleb Walker. We are pleased to confirm the arrangement. Miss Evelyn Moore will arrive via the Overland stage on April 18, 1883, approximately 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We trust you will find the match satisfactory. Satisfactory. The word sat strange in his mouth when he whispered it to the empty cabin. He wasn't looking for satisfactory. He was looking for someone who wouldn't leave him talking to horses and counting the days between supply runs to town like a man slowly losing his grip on sanity. The Montana Territory stretched around his 160 acres in every direction, beautiful in its vastness, crushing in its silence. He'd proven up his claim 2 years back, built a sturdy cabin with his own hands, run cattle that somehow survived the brutal winters, and managed to carve out something that looked almost like prosperity. But prosperity meant nothing when you ate every meal alone, when the sound of your own voice startled you because you'd gone weeks without using it, when you lay awake at night wondering if this was all there was, work and silence, and slowly turning into something more stone than man. He'd resisted the idea of a mail-order bride for a long time. It felt like admitting defeat, like confessing that he wasn't man enough to find a wife the normal way. But there was no normal way out here. The few women in the territory were already spoken for, and the ones who came through on their way to somewhere else took one look at the endless grass and kept moving. He couldn't blame them. Sometimes he wanted to keep moving too. So he'd written to the agency in Chicago, paid the fee, filled out the forms with awkward honesty, 32 years old, owns land, can provide a home, seeks a woman of good character for marriage and partnership. He hadn't known what else to say. How did you advertise for someone to share your whole life with when you'd barely shared a conversation in years? The response had come 3 months later. Miss Evelyn Moore, age 26, of good family, educated, seeking a fresh start in the Western Territories. The agency included a small photograph, a woman with dark hair and serious eyes, her face pleasant but unsmiling, her posture straight as a schoolteacher's. She looked real. That's what had struck him most. Not beautiful like a painting, not promising more than he deserved, just real. A real woman who might actually step off a stagecoach and into his life. Now, with 2 days until her arrival, Caleb moved through his cabin like a man preparing for an inspection. He'd been preparing for weeks, actually, in small ways that embarrassed him when he thought about them too hard. He'd chinked every gap in the log walls until no daylight showed through, built a proper wardrobe with a mirror he'd hauled back from town, nearly breaking his neck when the wagon hit a rut, sewn curtains from fabric he'd picked out himself, standing in the mercantile while Mrs. Patterson tried not to smile at his complete bewilderment over which pattern a woman might prefer. "The blue," she'd finally said, taking pity on him, "with the small flowers. It's cheerful without being too fussy." Cheerful. He'd bought 10 yards. The curtains hung now in the 2 windows, moving slightly in the draft that came through the door he'd left open. The cabin looked different with them, softer somehow, less like a place where a man just survived and more like a place where people might actually live. He'd scrubbed the plank floors until his knees ached, positioned the table and chairs he'd built at angles that seemed welcoming, set the bed, his bed, which would somehow become their bed, With the new quilt Mrs. Patterson had helped him order from a catalog. That bed was a source of constant anxiety. He'd built a frame that didn't squeak, bought a mattress filled with something better than straw, made sure the blankets were thick and clean. But every time he looked at it, he imagined the awkwardness of the first night, the terrible vulnerability of sharing that intimate space with a stranger who'd agreed to marry him sight unseen. What if she took one look at him and regretted everything? What if he disappointed her in ways he couldn't even imagine? He shook his head, forcing the thoughts away. The cabin was ready. That's what mattered. He'd done everything he could think of to make it welcoming. Outside, the land was finally shaking off winter's grip. Green pushed up through the brown grass, tentative but determined. The cottonwoods along the creek were fuzzing out with new leaves, and the mountains in the distance had started to shed their snow, revealing the gray-blue stone underneath. It was pretty, he supposed, if you could see it that way. Mostly it just felt empty. His closest neighbor was 5 miles south, a family named Morrison with 6 kids and a wife who looked exhausted every time Caleb saw her in town. Beyond them, nothing but land and sky and the occasional drift of cattle. The town of Ashford, such as it was, sat 12 miles east, a collection of buildings trying hard to be a real settlement. A mercantile, a saloon, a church, a handful of houses, and a stage stop that served the overland route twice a week. That's where she'd arrive. At the stage stop, in front of whoever happened to be in town that day, ready to judge whether Caleb Walker had managed to secure himself a decent wife or made a fool of himself trying. The thought made his stomach clench. He spent the next day working himself half to death, trying to exhaust the nervous energy that made his hands shake when he held still too long. He mended fence line that didn't strictly need mending, chopped enough firewood to last through next winter, hauled water from the creek until his shoulders burned. Physical work usually settled his mind, but not today. Today, every swing of the axe just gave him more time to imagine everything that could go wrong. What if she didn't come? What if she took one look at Ashford and refused to get off the stage? What if the agency had made a mistake, sent her to the wrong territory, given her to some other man who deserved her more? What if— "Stop it," he said out loud, his voice rough from disuse. "Just stop." But he couldn't. That night he barely slept, lying in the bed that would soon be shared, staring at the ceiling beams he'd hewn himself. He thought about his parents, long dead, who'd had a marriage that looked easy, full of small touches and shared glances, and the kind of comfort that came from really knowing another person. He thought about what he'd promised in his letters to the agency: respect, provision, protection. He thought about what he hadn't promised because he didn't know if he was capable of it. Affection, understanding, the kind of partnership that made two people stronger than they were alone. He must have dozed eventually because when he opened his eyes, dawn was leaking through the blue curtains, turning everything soft and gray. The 18th of April, the day his life was supposed to change. He rose and washed with water so cold it made his teeth ache, shaved carefully with a hand that wanted to tremble, dressed in his good shirt and the wool pants he saved for town. He looked at himself in the new mirror and saw a stranger, a man trying too hard, wanting too much, hoping for something he probably didn't deserve. "She agreed to come," he told his reflection. "That counts for something." The ride to Ashford took 2 hours, his bay gelding setting an easy pace through country that was finally starting to green up proper. Caleb tried to notice the beauty of it, the way the light hit the grass, the sound of meadowlarks, the clean smell of earth warming up after the long freeze. Because maybe these were things Evelyn would notice too, things that might make her feel less like she'd come to the end of the earth. Town was quiet when he arrived, just before noon. Too early for the stage, but he couldn't stand waiting at the cabin another minute. He tied his horse outside the mercantile and nodded to the few people he passed, ignoring their curious looks. Word had spread, of course. In a place like Ashford, a mail-order bride was news that traveled faster than weather. "Caleb," Mrs. Patterson appeared in the doorway of the store, wiping her hands on her apron. She was a kind woman, one of the few people in town who'd ever gone out of her way to speak to him. "Big day." "Yes, ma'am." "You look nervous as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs." Her smile was gentle. "That's natural, but you're a good man, Caleb Walker. You remember that if things feel awkward at first, a good man with a good home, Any woman worth her salt will see that. I hope you're right. I am right. Now, does she know about the cabin? About what she's coming to? I was honest in my letters, Caleb said. Told her about the land, the isolation, what life's like out here. Didn't want to mislead her. That's good. Honesty's a fine foundation. Mrs. Patterson glanced down the street toward the stage stop. Though sometimes what we write and what folks see can be different things. Just be patient with her. Coming all this way to marry a stranger, that takes courage. Or desperation. Either way, she'll need some gentleness while she finds her footing. The word desperation settled in Caleb's gut like a stone. He hadn't thought about it quite that way. That maybe Evelyn was as desperate as he was, just in different ways. The agency had said she was seeking a fresh start. What did that mean? What was she leaving behind? He didn't have long to wonder. At 1:30, the sound of harness and hoofbeats announced the stage's approach. Caleb's heart kicked into a rhythm that had nothing to do with exertion and everything to do with sheer terror. The overland coach rolled into view, dust rising around its wheels, the driver shouting at his team. It was a battered thing, scarred by weather and hard use, pulled by 6 horses that looked as tired as anything Caleb had ever seen. The stage stop attendant moved forward to handle the team, and a small crowd gathered. Not many people, but enough to make Caleb feel exposed. Mrs. Patterson, the saloon keeper. A couple of cowboys he recognized from one of the nearby ranches, all of them watching. The coach rocked to a stop. The driver climbed down, stretched, and moved to open the passenger door. Caleb's breath caught and held. 2 people emerged first, a traveling salesman in a dusty suit and an older man who looked like he might be a banker. They barely glanced around before heading off down the street. Then there was a pause, a moment of stillness, and the driver reached up to help someone else down. A woman's hand appeared, gripping the doorframe. Slender fingers, no gloves despite the dust and travel. Then she stepped into view, and Caleb's first thought was that the photograph hadn't done her justice. Evelyn Moore was slight, almost delicate-looking, with dark hair pulled back in a style that had probably been neat when she started the journey, but now showed the effects of days on the road. She wore a gray traveling dress that had seen better days, and she moved with a careful precision that suggested either exhaustion or pain. Then she turned her face toward the light, and Caleb's second thought drove every other consideration from his mind. The entire left side of her face was bruised, a purple-black mark that spread from her cheekbone to her jaw, the kind of bruise that came from a fist, not a fall. Her left eye was swollen, the skin around it puffy and discolored. She held herself very still, as if movement might hurt, and her right hand clutched a small carpet bag with white-knuckled intensity. Behind her, the stage driver pulled out a larger trunk and set it on the ground with more care than usual. He glanced at Evelyn's face, then away quickly, his expression carefully neutral. Caleb stood frozen, his prepared greeting dying on his tongue. She looked so small standing there in the dust, so breakable, and the bruise on her face was an accusation he didn't know how to answer. Mrs. Patterson moved first, stepping forward with the kind of brisk kindness that left no room for awkwardness. "You must be Miss Moore. Welcome to Ashford. I'm Sarah Patterson. I run the mercantile here." Evelyn's gaze shifted to Mrs. Patterson, and something in her posture eased slightly. "Thank you." Her voice was quiet but steady, cultured in a way that marked her as Eastern, educated. "I appreciate your kindness. This here is Caleb Walker," Mrs. Patterson continued, gesturing. "Your intended." Evelyn turned then, meeting Caleb's eyes for the first time, and he saw something in her expression that made his chest ache. Wariness, yes, but also a bone-deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with travel. She was braced for disappointment, for rejection, for whatever blow would come next. She was waiting for him to turn away. Caleb forced himself to move, to step forward, to remember how to be a human being instead of a statue. "Miss Moore." He touched the brim of his hat, trying to gentle his voice the way he did with spooked horses. "I'm glad you made it safely." The word safely felt ridiculous given the evidence on her face, but he didn't know what else to say. "Mr. Walker." She inclined her head slightly, a gesture that was almost formal. "Thank you for the arrangement." There was a pause, awkward and thick, filled with all the things neither of them knew how to say in front of witnesses. Then the stage driver cleared his throat and pulled an envelope from his coat. "Got a letter for you, Walker, from the agency. Said to give it to you when I delivered the lady." Caleb took the envelope, noting the seal was already broken. The driver must have read it, or someone had. Privacy wasn't much of a commodity on the frontier. He opened it there in the street because waiting would only make things worse. The message was brief, written in the same official hand as the earlier correspondence. "Mr. Walker, be advised that Miss Moore comes to you seeking sanctuary as much as marriage. She has left difficult circumstances in Chicago and requires a place of safety. We trust you will provide appropriate protection and discretion. The arrangement is legal and binding upon your marriage. She comes with our recommendation despite irregular circumstances." Caleb read it twice, then looked up at Evelyn. She was watching him, her good eye clear and direct despite the damage around it, waiting to see what he would do with this information. "Miss Moore," he said carefully, folding the letter and putting it in his pocket. "I have a wagon just over here. If you're ready, I'd like to get you home where you can rest." Something flickered across her face, surprise, maybe, or relief. That would be welcome. He collected her trunk while she spoke quietly with Mrs. Patterson, catching fragments of their conversation. "If you need anything, dear." "Very kind of you." "Caleb's a good man, but if you ever need a woman to talk to—" When he returned with the wagon, Evelyn was standing alone, her carpet bag at her feet, looking smaller than ever in the vast openness of the Montana afternoon. The other onlookers had drifted away, their curiosity satisfied, or at least temporarily sated. It was just the two of them now. Two strangers bound by a contract neither had signed yet, staring at each other across a distance that had nothing to do with physical space. "May I help you up?" Caleb gestured to the wagon seat. Evelyn nodded, and when he offered his hand, she took it. Her fingers were cold despite the warmth of the day, and he could feel the tremor running through them. She stepped up carefully, moving like someone who'd learned to anticipate pain, and settled onto the seat with visible relief. Caleb climbed up beside her, released the brake, and guided the horse toward the edge of town. Neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't hostile either. It was just the quiet of two people who didn't yet know what words would build a bridge between them. The road stretched ahead, rutted and rough, leading back toward the cabin and whatever came next. Caleb kept the pace easy, mindful of every bump and jolt, aware of how Evelyn braced herself against the movement. He wanted to ask about the bruise, about what she'd left behind, about what sanctuary meant to her. But the questions felt too large, too intrusive for someone he'd known for all of 20 minutes. Instead, he said, "It's about 2 hours to the ranch. The road's not great, but I'll try to keep it smooth. I'm accustomed to rough travel." Evelyn's voice was steady, but quiet. "This is fine. There's water in the canteen if you're thirsty." "Thank you." More silence. The wagon wheels creaked. A hawk circled overhead, riding thermals Caleb couldn't see. The mountain stood purple in the distance, still snow-capped despite the spring warmth. Beautiful country, if you could appreciate it. Empty country, if you couldn't. "Miss Moore," Caleb started, then stopped, not sure how to continue. "Yes?" "The letter from the agency. It mentioned circumstances. I want you to know that I don't need to know details if you don't want to share them. What matters is that you're here now and you'll be safe. That's a promise." Evelyn turned to look at him fully for the first time, and he saw tears standing in her eyes, held back by what must have been tremendous effort. "You don't want to know what I'm running from?" "Everyone's running from something out here," Caleb said. "That's half the reason people come to the territories. What you're running from is your business. What I can offer you going forward, that's mine." A single tear escaped, tracking down her bruised cheek. She wiped it away quickly, almost angrily, as if ashamed of the display. "Most men would have questions. I'm not most men, and you're not obligated to answer questions you don't want to answer." "The agency said the arrangement is binding upon marriage," Evelyn said carefully. "But we're not married yet." "No," Caleb agreed. "We're not. So I could leave, if I wanted to." "You could." He kept his eyes on the road, giving her the privacy to say what she needed without his gaze on her. Though I'd ask where you'd go if you have people who'd take you in. If you do, and you want to go to them, I'll put you on the next stage and pay your fare. No questions, no obligations. I have no one. The words were flat, final. That's why I'm here. Then you're not leaving, Caleb said. Not unless you choose to. But either way, you're safe. That part's not negotiable. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. Why? Why what? Why offer safety to a stranger, a woman who comes with irregular circumstances? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Caleb considered the question, watching the road unfold ahead of them. My parents taught me that when someone needs help, you help them. Doesn't matter if they're a stranger. Doesn't matter what brought them to needing help. You just do the right thing and let the rest sort itself out. That's a dangerous philosophy in this world. Maybe, but it's the only one I know how to live by. They rode in silence after that, but it felt different somehow, less like the awkwardness of strangers and more like the quiet of people who'd reached an understanding, however tentative. Caleb pointed out landmarks as they passed, the creek where he got water, the ridge where elk sometimes grazed, the stand of cottonwoods that marked the boundary of his land. Evelyn listened without comment, taking it all in with that careful, watchful attention. When the cabin finally came into view, small against the vast backdrop of grass and sky, Caleb felt a spike of anxiety. It had looked welcoming this morning, but now, seeing it through Evelyn's eyes, he saw only its limitations, the rough logs, the smallness of it, the sheer isolation of the place. It's not much, he said, hating the apologetic note in his voice, but it's sturdy, warm in winter, cool in summer. There's good water close by, and the land's got potential. It looks solid, Evelyn said, and he couldn't tell if she was being diplomatic or genuine. He pulled the wagon up near the door and set the brake, then climbed down and moved to help her. This time when she took his hand, she didn't pull away immediately, and for just a moment they stood there in the late afternoon light, her hand in his, neither quite willing to be the first to break contact. "Welcome home," Caleb said quietly. Evelyn looked up at him, her bruised face serious, and nodded once. "Thank you." He carried her trunk inside while she followed, moving slowly, taking in the blue curtains, the scrubbed floors, the small touches he'd added trying to make the place feel welcoming. He set the trunk at the foot of the bed, then stepped back, suddenly aware of how intimate this space was, how there was nowhere to go for privacy, nowhere to escape the reality of what they'd agreed to. "I know it's not what you're used to," he started. "It's clean," Evelyn interrupted, "and it's warm, and it's—" She paused, searching for the word. "It's peaceful. That's more than I had before." The simple honesty of it broke something in Caleb's chest. He wanted to ask what before had been like, what had put that bruise on her face and that wariness in her eyes. But he'd promised not to push, so instead he said, "There's a basin for washing, and I can heat water if you want a proper bath. Food's simple, but there's enough. And the bed is yours tonight. I'll sleep in the barn." "You don't have to." "I do." His voice was firm. "Until we're properly married, I'll sleep in the barn. It's not far, and it's comfortable enough. You need rest without worrying about anything else." Evelyn's shoulders dropped, tension bleeding out of them. "You're very kind, Mr. Walker." "Caleb," he said, "we're going to be married. Might as well use first names." "Caleb," she repeated, trying it out. "I'm Evelyn, not Miss Moore, just Evelyn." Evelyn. He liked how it sounded, soft and real. "Are you hungry? I can make something simple." "I'm exhausted more than hungry," she admitted. "If you don't mind, I think I'd just like to rest." "Of course." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Evelyn?" "Yes?" "I meant what I said. You're safe here. No one's going to hurt you, and no one's going to force you into anything you don't want. We'll figure the rest out as we go." She studied him for a long moment, and he wondered what she saw. A rough frontiersman who didn't know how to talk to women, a stranger making promises he might not be able to keep, or maybe, just maybe, someone telling the truth. "I believe you," she said finally. "I don't know why, but I do." It was enough. More than enough. Caleb left her then, closing the door quietly behind him, and stood in the yard listening to the evening sounds of the ranch. Cattle lowing in the distance, wind moving through new grass, the creek running clear and cold over stones that had been there long before he built his cabin and would be there long after he was gone. He'd brought a woman to this lonely place, a woman running from something bad enough to mark her skin and dim her eyes. He'd made promises about safety and protection, promises he fully intended to keep. But standing there in the growing dark, Caleb wondered if promises would be enough. If a quiet cabin and honest intentions could possibly be what Evelyn needed to heal from whatever had broken her. The barn was comfortable enough, like he'd told her. Clean straw, a couple of blankets, the warm presence of his horse in the nearby stall. He settled in as the last light faded from the sky, but sleep was a long time coming. Through the darkness, he could see the faint glow of lamplight in the cabin windows, those blue curtains backlit and soft, proof that someone was there, that he wasn't alone anymore. It should have been comforting. Instead, it terrified him. Because now someone was depending on him, someone who'd traveled across half a continent to escape something terrible, trusting that a stranger's promise of sanctuary meant something real. Someone who'd agreed to marry him despite not knowing if he was any better than whatever she'd left behind. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on Caleb's chest until breathing felt like work. What if he failed her? What if his protection wasn't enough? What if the past she was running from came looking and he couldn't stop it? But then he thought about the moment when Evelyn had taken his hand to climb into the wagon, and later when she'd stood in the cabin and called it peaceful. He thought about the relief in her voice when he'd said he'd sleep in the barn, the way her shoulders had dropped when she realized he meant it. Small things. Honest things. Maybe that's all this was. One small, honest thing at a time, building towards something that might eventually look like trust, like partnership, like the marriage his parents had built on years of small kindnesses and kept promises. The lamp in the cabin went dark. Evelyn was resting, or trying to. In the morning, they'd figure out the next step. And the step after that. One day at a time, one choice at a time, until maybe, eventually, this arrangement became something real. Caleb closed his eyes and let the sounds of the night settle around him. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and grass and possibility. It wasn't the beginning he'd imagined, but it was a beginning nonetheless. And tomorrow, they'd see what came next. Morning came with birdsong and the pale wash of dawn through the barn's cracks. Caleb woke stiff and cold, his breath misting in the early air, and for a moment he forgot why he was sleeping in straw instead of his own bed. Then memory returned. Evelyn, the bruise, the promises he'd made, and he sat up quickly, brushing hay from his clothes. The cabin sat quiet in the growing light, smoke rising from the chimney. She was awake then, had figured out the stove. That was something. He gave himself a few minutes to make himself presentable, splashing water from the trough on his face, running damp hands through his hair before walking across the yard. He knocked, which felt strange on his own door, and waited. "Come in." Her voice was muffled but clear. Evelyn stood at the stove, her back to him, still wearing the gray traveling dress from yesterday. Her dark hair was pinned up neatly, and she moved with the careful precision of someone who'd learned to work through pain. The bruise looked worse in daylight, deeper purple, the swelling more pronounced, but she didn't try to hide it. "I hope you don't mind," she said without turning. "I found coffee and made some. I wasn't sure of your routine." "That's fine. More than fine." Caleb closed the door gently. "You didn't have to. I need to be useful." She did turn then, meeting his eyes with that direct gaze that was becoming familiar. "I can't just exist here. I need to contribute something. You just arrived yesterday. You should rest." "I've rested enough." There was steel under the quiet words. "If we're going to make this work, this arrangement, I need to understand what's expected of me, what my role is here." Caleb accepted the coffee she poured, wrapping his hands around the warm cup. "I suppose we should talk about that, about what comes next." "Marriage," Evelyn said flatly. "That's what the contract says. That's what you paid for." The word stung, though he couldn't say why exactly. "I didn't pay for you. I paid an agency fee to make an introduction. There's a difference." Is there? She sat at the table, her own cup untouched. You sent money. I was sent here. That sounds like a transaction. Maybe it started that way, Caleb admitted, sitting across from her. But it doesn't have to stay that way. We can make it whatever we choose to make it. Evelyn's laugh was short, bitter. You're an optimist, Mr. Walker. Caleb. Caleb, then. She wrapped her arms around herself despite the warmth from the stove. I should tell you something. About Chicago, about why I left. You don't owe me. I do, though. If we're going to marry, you deserve to know what you're getting. She took a breath and he saw her gathering courage. I was married before, to a man named Richard Holbrook. He was from a good family, wealthy, respected. On paper, he was everything a woman could want. Caleb stayed quiet, letting her find her words. In reality, he was cruel. Not at first, he hid it well during our courtship. But after the wedding, when I belonged to him legally, she touched her bruised cheek unconsciously. This wasn't the first time, just the worst, or maybe just the last straw. I don't know anymore. How'd you get away? His business took him to New York for a month. I had time to plan, to hide money, to contact the agency. When I left, I took nothing but what I could carry. Everything else, my clothes, my books, my mother's jewelry, I left it all behind because taking it would have given him grounds to pursue me for theft. Her voice was remarkably steady. I committed no crime except leaving my husband, which isn't technically illegal, though socially it's unforgivable. But Richard won't see it that way. He'll see it as stolen property escaping. The casual way she said property made Caleb's hands tighten on his cup. The agency knows about this? I told them everything. They said the distance would protect me. That Montana was far enough from Chicago that Richard wouldn't bother looking. That a new marriage would make me legally untouchable. She finally looked at him. But I don't know if that's true. I don't know if anywhere is far enough. You're divorced then? No. The word was heavy with implications. Divorce would have required his consent, which he'd never give. It would embarrass his family. So I'm still technically married to him, which makes this, she gestured between them, complicated. Caleb absorbed this, turning it over in his mind. So if we marry, it wouldn't be legal. Not in the eyes of the law, no. Though out here, who would check? Who would know? Evelyn's voice dropped. I understand if this changes things. If you want to send me back. The agency didn't fully explain my circumstances to you, and that's not fair. Send you back to what? Caleb asked quietly. To a man who does that to your face? To a life where you're property instead of a person? To legal consequences? To shame? To... She stopped, her composure finally cracking. I don't know. I have nowhere else to go. No family left. No friends who would risk their reputations by helping me. The agency was my last option, and I might have ruined even that by being honest with you. Caleb stood and moved to the window, looking out at land that stretched empty and free in every direction. Out here, the law was mostly a theory. People made their own rules, lived by their own codes, and what happened in Chicago might as well be happening on the moon for all it mattered to daily survival. Here's what I think, he said finally. I think legal marriage is just paper. What matters is the commitment two people make to each other. We can stand in front of the circuit preacher when he comes through next month, say the words, and live as husband and wife. Maybe it won't hold up in a Chicago court, but it'll hold up here. And here's where we are. You do that? Knowing it might not be legal? Knowing I come with complications? He turned to face her. You came here seeking safety and a fresh start. I came to this territory seeking the same things, just from loneliness instead of violence. Seems to me we both need what the other can offer. That's more honest than most marriages start with. Evelyn stood slowly, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I don't love you. I know. I don't know if I can love anyone. Not after Richard. That's all right. Caleb kept his voice gentle. Love isn't something you force. Either it grows or it doesn't. What matters right now is partnership, trust, building something together that's better than what we had alone. And if Richard finds me, then he'll have to go through me. The words came out harder than he intended. And I promise you, Evelyn, that's not going to be easy for him. She studied him for a long moment, and he wondered what she saw. He wasn't imposing, average height, lean from hard work rather than bulky with muscle. His hands were scarred from ranch work, his face weathered from sun and wind. He probably didn't look like much protection against a wealthy man with resources and rage. But he meant what he said, every word of it. "All right," Evelyn said finally. "All right, we'll try. But I need you to understand something. I won't be a real wife. Not in all ways. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I can't. I told you last night, I sleep in the barn until you say otherwise. That stands for as long as you need it to. Most men wouldn't accept that. I'm not most men." He allowed himself a small smile. "Besides, the barn's not so bad. Horse is good company." The tension in the room eased slightly, not breaking, but bending. Evelyn even smiled, just a flicker, before it disappeared behind her careful guard. "So what happens now?" she asked. "What does a day look like here?" "Well, normally I'd be checking cattle, mending fence, working the land. There's always something that needs doing on a ranch." Caleb moved back to the table, refilling his coffee. "But today, I thought I'd show you around properly, let you see what you've gotten yourself into. And we should go to town, let people know we're planning to marry. Mrs. Patterson will spread the word, and when the preacher comes through, we'll be ready." "You want to take me to town, looking like this?" She touched her face again. "I want people to see you as my intended. Your bruise is going to raise questions. Better we answer them honestly than let rumors grow." He hesitated. "Unless you'd rather wait until it heals." "No." Her voice was firm. "No, you're right. Better to face it directly. I'm tired of hiding." They finished breakfast, eggs and bread that Evelyn had managed despite her unfamiliarity with the stove, and then Caleb helped her into the wagon. The ride to town was easier than yesterday's silence. Evelyn asked questions about the land, about ranching, about what winter was like in Montana. He answered as best he could, surprised by how much she wanted to know. "You're not what I expected," she said as they crested a hill that gave a view of the valley. "What did you expect?" "Someone rougher, less thoughtful, I suppose. The agency's description made you sound competent and decent, but I didn't expect gentleness." "Gentleness isn't weakness," Caleb said. "My father taught me that. He could break a horse or build a barn with the best of them, but he was gentle with my mother, gentle with me. Said there was enough hardness in the world without adding to it at home." "He sounds like a good man." "He was. Both my parents were. Lost them to fever when I was 23. That's partly why I came west. Too many memories back in Kansas." Evelyn nodded, understanding. "My parents are gone too. Mother died when I was 16, father 2 years later. I think grief killed him more than illness. After that, it was just me and my aunt, and she was the one who encouraged the match with Richard. Said I needed a husband to take care of me." Her voice went flat. She meant well. The road to Ashford was busier today, a freight wagon heading out, a couple of riders coming in. Word would spread fast that Caleb Walker was bringing his mail-order bride to town. By evening, everyone within 20 miles would have heard about it, probably with creative embellishments. Mrs. Patterson was in the mercantile when they arrived, and her face lit up when she saw them. "Evelyn, Caleb, come in, come in. I was hoping you'd stop by." Inside, the store smelled of coffee and fabric, and the particular mustiness of a building that stocked everything from nails to sugar. Mrs. Patterson ushered them to the counter, her eyes taking in Evelyn's bruise without comment. "I expect you'll be needing supplies," she said. "Setting up a household properly. What can I help you with?" "Actually," Caleb said, "we came to let you know we'll be getting married soon as the preacher comes through. Wanted to hear it from us first before the gossip starts." Mrs. Patterson's smile was genuine. "That's wonderful news. Congratulations to you both. Have you thought about what you'll need for the ceremony?" "I hadn't really," Caleb started, but Evelyn interrupted. "A simple dress would be nice. Nothing fancy, just something appropriate for a wedding. If you have fabric, I can sew it myself." "Nonsense," Mrs. Patterson was already moving toward the fabric section. "I have a dress that might work with some alterations. Let me show you." While the women discussed clothing, Caleb wandered the store, picking up supplies they'd need: flour, coffee, sugar, things that made a house feel lived in. He was examining a set of dishes when the door opened and Sheriff Tom Brennan walked in. Brennan was a solid man in his 50s, fair-minded but not naive about the realities of frontier justice. He nodded to Caleb, then his eyes found Evelyn across the store, and his expression went carefully neutral. "Caleb, heard you had a visitor arrive yesterday." "Evelyn Moore, my intended. We'll be marrying soon." "That's so." Brennan's voice was conversational, but Caleb heard the question underneath. "She's settling in all right?" "Well enough." "That's a nasty bruise she's got." Caleb met the sheriff's eyes directly. "Got it before she arrived. Nothing to do with me or anyone here." "Didn't think it did." Brennan lowered his voice. "But I have to ask, Caleb, is she running from trouble? The kind that might follow her here?" It was a fair question, one Caleb had expected. "She left a bad situation back east. Man she was married to turned out to be cruel. She's looking for a fresh start somewhere safe." "She's still married to this man?" "Legally, yes. But he's in Chicago, and we're here. She's not going back." Brennan was quiet for a moment, considering. "You know that if he comes looking, if he has legal claim, my hands might be tied." "I know the law, Tom. I also know that out here, a man who beats his wife isn't likely to find much sympathy, legal claim or not." "True enough." The sheriff glanced at Evelyn again, who was examining a dress with Mrs. Patterson. "Just wanted to make sure you knew what you might be getting into. Rich man with connections, he could make trouble." "Let him try." Something in Caleb's tone made Brennan smile slightly. "All right then. I'll keep an ear out. Let you know if anyone comes asking questions. In the meantime, congratulations on the upcoming wedding." After the sheriff left, Caleb rejoined Evelyn and Mrs. Patterson. The older woman had found a dress in a soft blue fabric, simple but elegant, and Evelyn was holding it with something close to wonder. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. "It was my daughter's," Mrs. Patterson explained. "She got married 3 years ago and moved to Oregon. Left several dresses behind, said I should give them to someone who needed them. I think this one was meant for you." "I couldn't, You can and you will. Consider it a wedding gift. We'll take it in at the waist, maybe shorten the hem a bit, and it'll be perfect." Evelyn's eyes were bright again, but this time from gratitude rather than pain. "Thank you, truly." They spent another hour in town, Caleb loading supplies while Evelyn talked with Mrs. Patterson about practical matters, cooking on a wood stove, managing laundry in winter, where to find wild herbs that grew in the area. It was the kind of conversation that assumed a future, a life being built rather than just survived. On the way back to the ranch, Evelyn was quieter, but not in the tense way of yesterday. She seemed to be thinking, processing, maybe letting herself believe that this might actually work. "The sheriff asked about me," she said finally. "He did." "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That you left a bad situation and you're not going back." "And he was satisfied with that?" "Tom Brennan's a good man. He understands that sometimes the law and justice aren't the same thing." Caleb glanced at her. "He said he'd keep an ear out, let us know if anyone comes asking questions. That's about the best protection we can hope for without involving courts and lawyers." "I don't want to bring trouble to you. Too late. I chose this with eyes open. Whatever comes, we'll handle it together." That word, together, seemed to settle something in Evelyn. Her shoulders relaxed, and she looked out at the passing landscape with less wariness, more like she was actually seeing it. Back at the ranch, Caleb showed her around properly. The barn where he'd been sleeping, clean and well-maintained despite its rough construction. The root cellar he'd dug into the hillside for storing vegetables through winter. The chicken coop he'd built last year, currently empty but ready for birds come spring. The creek with its clear water running over smooth stones. Cottonwoods providing shade. "It's peaceful here," Evelyn said, standing by the water. "I didn't think I'd ever find peace again." "It's quiet enough that you can hear yourself think. Sometimes that's exactly what you need." She turned to him. "Can I ask you something personal?" "All right." "Why a mail-order bride? You're not unpleasant to look at. You have land. You're clearly capable. Why not find someone local? Court them properly?" Caleb skipped a stone across the creek, watching it bounce 3 times before sinking. "There aren't many women out here, and the ones that are have their pick of men. I'm not much for socializing, don't do well at dances or church gatherings. And I guess I got tired of being lonely, tired of talking to myself and getting no answer. The agency seemed like a practical solution to a practical problem. That's honest. I try to be. Lying's too much work. Evelyn almost smiled. I think I'm starting to understand you, Caleb Walker. That makes one of us. I've been a mystery to myself for years. This time she did smile, brief but real, and it transformed her face despite the bruise. For just a moment, he saw what she might look like when she wasn't carrying the weight of fear and pain, bright and alive and present in a way that had nothing to do with just surviving. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Caleb worked the land while Evelyn organized the cabin, learning the quirks of the stove, figuring out how to manage with limited supplies, making the space feel more like a home. He still slept in the barn, and she didn't push the issue. They ate meals together, talking about small things mostly. Weather, work that needed doing, observations about the land. She was smart, he learned, educated in ways that showed in her vocabulary, her understanding of things beyond just domestic work. She could discuss books he'd never read, had opinions about politics and society that were sharper than anything he'd encounter in Ashford. But she also had practical skills. She could sew beautifully, cook efficiently despite the limitations, and she wasn't afraid of hard work. A week passed, then another. The bruise on Evelyn's face faded from purple to yellow-green, the swelling going down until it was barely noticeable. With it, some of the tension in her posture eased. She started to move through the cabin with more confidence, started to offer opinions instead of just following his lead. Then one morning at breakfast, she said, "I think someone's watching the ranch." Caleb's coffee cup paused halfway to his mouth. "What makes you say that?" "Yesterday, when you were checking the north fence, I saw movement on the ridge, like someone on horseback just sitting there. And this morning I thought I saw the same thing, but when I looked closer, they were gone. Could be drifters, or cowboys from one of the neighboring ranches cutting through. Maybe." But her voice held doubt. "Or maybe Richard found me." The fear in those words made Caleb's jaw tighten. If anyone's watching, we'll find out who and why. But Evelyn, I need you to trust me. I won't let anyone take you back, not without a fight. I don't want you to fight for me. I don't want you hurt because of my mistakes. Marrying a cruel man wasn't a mistake. Leaving him was survival. And protecting you isn't fighting for you. It's fighting with you. There's a difference. She absorbed this, her fingers tight around her own cup. What do? We keep living our lives. We don't give fear more power than it deserves. And we stay alert. He stood, moving to the window. "I'll ride the property today. Check for signs of anyone trespassing. If someone's out there, I'll find them. And if it's Richard, then we'll deal with it when the time comes. But speculation just makes us crazy. One step at a time, remember?" Caleb spent the day riding the boundaries of his land, looking for tracks, for campsites, for any sign that someone was watching the ranch. He found nothing concrete. A few hoof prints that could have been from any horse. A spot where grass was flattened that might have been a bedroll or might have been deer. Nothing definitive. But his instincts, honed by years of living alone and paying attention to his surroundings, told him Evelyn was right. Someone had been there. Someone was watching. He didn't share this certainty with her when he returned, just said he'd found nothing conclusive and they should stay watchful. But that night, he moved his bedroll from the barn to the floor of the cabin, telling her it was about convenience, not wanting to walk through the cold. They both knew it was a lie, and they both accepted it. 3 days later, Sheriff Brennan rode out to the ranch unannounced. Caleb saw him coming and met him in the yard, Evelyn emerging from the cabin to stand on the porch. "Tom, what brings you out here?" Brennan dismounted, his face serious. "Had a visitor in town yesterday, man from Chicago, asking questions about a woman who might have come through on the stage. Described Evelyn pretty accurately. The world seemed to narrow to a single point of focus." "What did you tell him?" "Nothing. Said we get a lot of people passing through. Couldn't recall anyone specific. But Caleb, he's staying at the boarding house, asking around. Someone's going to remember seeing her, seeing you two together." "Did he give a name?" "William Carver. Said he was a private investigator hired by the Holbrook family to locate a missing relative." Evelyn made a small sound, quickly stifled. Caleb looked back at her, saw her face had gone pale, her hands gripping the porch railing. He's not taking her back, Caleb said flatly. Legally, if she's still married. I don't care about legally, Tom. I care about what's right. Brennan sighed. I figured you'd say that. Look, I can maybe slow him down, make it difficult for him to get information, but if he's determined, if he has resources behind him, he'll find out she's here eventually. You need to be prepared for that. We'll get married, tomorrow if possible. Will that help? Might complicate things for him. Can't claim unmarried women the same way. But Caleb, if she's already married, your marriage might not— I know. Caleb's voice was hard. But it sends a message. She's under my protection now. Anyone who wants to take her has to go through me. The sheriff looked between them, reading the determination in Caleb's stance, the fear and gratitude mixed in Evelyn's expression. All right, the circuit preacher's not due for another 2 weeks, but old man Henderson can perform marriages. He's a magistrate, been doing it for years. I'll ask him to ride out tomorrow if you want. We want. After Brennan left, Evelyn came down from the porch slowly. This is really happening. Richard found me. He sent someone to find you. That's not the same thing, and we're going to make it as hard as possible for this Carver to take you anywhere. Caleb reached out, hesitated, then gently took her hand. Tomorrow, we become husband and wife. In the eyes of everyone here, you'll be mine and I'll be yours. That counts for something. Even though it might not be legal? Especially because of that. We're choosing this, Evelyn. Not because a court says we have to, but because we want to. That makes it more real than any paper. She squeezed his hand, her eyes searching his face. I'm still afraid. That's all right. We'll be afraid together. But we won't let fear make our decisions for us. That night, Evelyn asked him to sleep in the cabin, not on the floor, but in the bed. Not for anything improper, she said quickly. Just because I don't want to be alone. Because tomorrow changes everything. And tonight I need to know someone's close. They lay fully clothed on opposite sides of the bed, a careful distance between them, listening to each other breathe in the darkness. It was the most intimate thing Caleb had done in years, this quiet sharing of space, this trust that he wouldn't take advantage, this acknowledgement that comfort sometimes mattered more than propriety. Caleb? Her voice was small in the dark. Yeah? Thank you for all of this, for not sending me away. Thank you for trusting me enough to stay. Silence settled, but it was the good kind, full rather than empty. And somewhere in that fullness, they both found enough peace to sleep. Morning came too fast and too slow all at once. Caleb woke to find Evelyn already up, standing at the window watching the first light break over the eastern hills. She was still wearing yesterday's dress, her hair loose around her shoulders, and something about the way she held herself, tense and waiting, told him she hadn't slept much despite their shared peace in the darkness. Second thoughts? He asked quietly, not moving from the bed. 1,000 of them. She didn't turn around. But I'm still here. That's all that matters. She finally looked at him, her expression complicated. Is it though? What if marrying me puts you in danger? What if Richard decides you're an obstacle to be removed? Then he'll learn that obstacles in Montana are harder to remove than obstacles in Chicago. Caleb sat up, running a hand through his hair. Evelyn, we've been over this. I'm making this choice with my eyes open. Whatever comes, we face it together. You keep saying that word, together, like it's simple. It is simple. Not easy, but simple. You and me against whatever the world throws at us. That's the deal. She turned back to the window, and he saw her shoulders shake once, hard, before she got herself under control. I don't deserve you. That's not for you to decide. I get to choose who I stand with, and I choose you. Now come on, we've got a wedding to prepare for. The morning passed in a strange blur of mundane activity charged with significance. Caleb shaved carefully, put on his best shirt, the one he saved for town. Evelyn worked on the blue dress Mrs. Patterson had given her, making final adjustments with needle and thread, her fingers steady despite everything. They didn't talk much, both lost in their own thoughts about what this day would mean. Henderson arrived just past noon, a grizzled old magistrate with a Bible so worn the leather cover was soft as cloth. Sheriff Brennan came with him, and Mrs. Patterson too, bringing fresh bread and a jar of preserves she said was for celebrating. They stood in the yard in front of the cabin, The four witnesses and the two people about to bind themselves together in a union that might not hold up in court, but would hold up where it mattered, in their community, in their daily lives. Evelyn looked beautiful in the blue dress despite the fading bruise still visible on her cheek. She'd pinned her hair up, and Mrs. Patterson had given her a small bunch of wildflowers to hold. She looked young and scared and determined all at once, and when she met Caleb's eyes across the small space between them, he saw her making the same choice he was: to trust, to hope, to take a chance on something better than what came before. Henderson opened his Bible, cleared his throat, and began. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of these witnesses to join this man and this woman in matrimony. It's a sacred bond, not to be entered into lightly, but reverently and soberly. He looked at Caleb. Do you, Caleb Walker, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part? I do. His voice was steady, sure. Henderson turned to Evelyn. And do you, Evelyn Moore, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish till death do you part? A pause, so brief most people probably didn't notice. But Caleb saw the moment she made the final choice, saw her square her shoulders and lift her chin. I do. Do you have rings? Caleb hadn't even thought about rings, but Mrs. Patterson stepped forward with two simple gold bands, pressing them into his hand with a smile. My mother's, she whispered. She'd want them to go to good use. Henderson blessed the rings, and Caleb slid one onto Evelyn's finger with hands that wanted to shake but didn't. She did the same for him, her touch light and careful, and the cool weight of the gold was startling against his work-roughened skin. By the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. That was the part Caleb hadn't prepared for. He looked at Evelyn, asking permission with his eyes, and she gave the smallest nod. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and pressed his lips to hers gently. Brief and chaste, nothing demanding, just the seal on the promises they'd made. When he pulled back, Evelyn's eyes were bright with tears she wouldn't let fall, and her hand tightened on his for just a moment before she let go. Congratulations, Henderson said warmly, shaking Caleb's hand and then Evelyn's. May you have many happy years together. Mrs. Patterson hugged them both, and even Sheriff Brennan cracked a smile. They went inside for the bread and preserves, for coffee and conversation that felt almost normal. But underneath it all, Caleb could feel the tension, the knowledge that somewhere in Ashford, a man was asking questions, getting closer to answers they didn't want him to find. The celebration was brief. Henderson had other business in town, and Brennan needed to get back to his duties. Mrs. Patterson lingered a bit longer, pulling Evelyn aside for a quiet conversation that Caleb couldn't hear but could guess the content of. Wifely advice, offers of friendship, probably warnings about the investigator who was asking around. When they were finally alone, married in the eyes of their community, if not the law, Evelyn sank into one of the chairs and laughed. It was a strange sound, edged with something that might have been hysteria if she'd let it go on longer. We did it, she said. We actually did it. Having regrets already? No, yes. I don't know. She looked up at him. I'm your wife now, Mrs. Walker. It doesn't feel real. Give it time. Nothing feels real at first. He sat across from her, still wearing the ring that marked him as a married man. But we are, really married in the ways that count. And when William Carver comes asking questions, when he comes, he'll learn that you're a married woman now, settled with your husband on his land. That changes the situation. Does it? Richard still has a legal claim. Maybe in Chicago, but we're not in Chicago. Caleb leaned forward. Look, I know you're scared. I would be too. But every day that passes, every choice we make to build a life here together, that makes it harder for anyone to just come in and tear it apart. We're not helpless, Evelyn. We have allies, we have community, and we have each other. She twisted the ring on her finger, feeling the unfamiliar weight of it. I want to believe you. Then believe me, just for today. Tomorrow, we can be scared again if we need to. That almost got a smile from her. One day at a time? One day at a time. They spent the rest of the afternoon in careful domesticity. Evelyn working on a quilt she'd started, Caleb mending tack that had been waiting for attention. Normal married tasks, building the illusion, or maybe the foundation of a normal married life. When evening came, Caleb made dinner while Evelyn set the table, and they ate together as the sun went down, painting the cabin walls gold and orange. "I should tell you something," Evelyn said as they were cleaning up. "About Richard. About what kind of man he is." "You don't have to." "I do. Because if Carver is here, Richard won't be far behind. And you need to understand what you're up against." She dried a plate slowly, not looking at him. "Richard Holbrook is wealthy, connected, and absolutely convinced of his own righteousness. He believes he owns things, companies, properties, people. When something of his goes missing, he retrieves it. Not because he wants it particularly, but because the principle of ownership matters to him. You're not a thing to be owned. I know that. You know that. Richard doesn't see it that way. To him, I'm a possession that had the audacity to walk away. He won't let that stand." Caleb set down the pot he'd been washing. "What did he do? I mean, besides the bruises. What made you finally run?" Evelyn was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she said very softly, "He broke my ribs. 3 of them. On my left side. I couldn't breathe without pain for weeks. When I asked to see a doctor, he told me that wives who angered their husbands didn't deserve medical care, that the pain would teach me to be more obedient." The rage that flooded through Caleb was cold and focused, nothing like the hot anger he'd felt before. This was the kind of rage that made men do dangerous things, the kind that didn't dissipate but settled into bone-deep determination. "If he comes here," Caleb said, his voice deadly calm, "if he tries to take you back, I will stop him. Whatever it takes, Evelyn. I don't care about his money or his connections. No man who does that to a woman is taking her anywhere. He could have you arrested. He could claim you're harboring his wife illegally. Let him try. Sheriff Brennan knows the truth. The people here know who you are now. Evelyn Walker, my wife. That's got to count for something. In Montana, maybe. But if he brings federal law into it, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. For now, we just live. We work the ranch, we build our life, and we don't let fear of what might happen stop us from living what's happening right now." Evelyn nodded slowly, setting aside the dried plate. All right, you're right. I can't spend every day waiting for the other shoe to drop." "Exactly. Now it's our wedding night. I know things are complicated, but maybe we could do something to mark it. Something that's just ours?" She considered this. "Like what?" "I don't know. Walk down to the creek, watch the stars. Something simple that we can remember later as the night we really started this." "A walk sounds nice." They went out into the cooling evening, the sky turning deep blue overhead as the first stars appeared. The creek ran quiet and steady, the sound of it peaceful in the gathering dark. They walked along the bank without talking, just being together in the space they were creating between them. Evelyn stopped at a bend where the water pooled deep and clear, reflecting the emerging stars. "It's beautiful here. I didn't expect Montana to be so beautiful. Most people don't. They think it's all harsh and barren. But there's beauty if you know where to look. Will you teach me? Where to look, I mean. How to see this place the way you do. If you teach me how to see it fresh. I've been here so long I forget to notice sometimes." She turned to him, and in the fading light her face was soft, the bruise barely visible now. "This is strange, isn't it? Being married to someone you barely know." "Strange," Caleb agreed, "but not bad. Not yet, anyway." "Not yet," she echoed, and there was hope in it, fragile but real. They stood there until full dark, until the stars were brilliant overhead, and the temperature dropped enough to make Evelyn shiver. Then they walked back to the cabin together, navigating the familiar path by starlight and long practice. Inside, the fire had burned down to coals. Caleb built it back up while Evelyn changed behind a blanket they'd strung across one corner for privacy. When she emerged, she was wearing a nightgown Mrs. Patterson had included with the dress, plain white cotton that covered her completely. "I'll take the floor tonight," Caleb said. Give you space on your wedding night. No, Evelyn's voice was firm. We're married now, we should share the bed. I trust you not to expect things I can't give yet, but I don't want you on the floor. That's not how this should be. So they lay together again, this time as husband and wife, still fully aware of the boundaries between them, but also aware of the tentative bridge being built. Caleb stayed on his side, careful not to crowd her, but when Evelyn's hand found his in the darkness and held on, he held back. Thank you, she whispered, for giving me time, for not demanding. You're worth waiting for, he said simply, however long it takes. He felt rather than saw her smile, and her grip on his hand tightened just slightly before relaxing into something that felt almost like peace. 3 days passed in quiet routine. Caleb worked the land while Evelyn managed the cabin, and slowly they learned each other's rhythms. She was an early riser, always up before dawn to start coffee. He was meticulous about chores, never leaving work half done. She liked things organized, orderly. He was comfortable with a certain amount of chaos. They navigated these differences carefully, both of them aware they were building something fragile that could break under too much pressure. On the 4th day, the pressure arrived. Caleb was mending fence on the north boundary when he saw the rider coming across his land, not approaching from the road like a normal visitor, but cutting straight across the property with the confidence of someone who didn't care about trespassing. He set down his tools and waited, hand resting casually near the rifle he'd started carrying since Brennan's warning. The man who reined up 20 feet away was dressed too well for ranch country. Eastern suit, polished boots, a hat that had never seen real work. He sat his horse like someone who'd learned to ride for sport, not necessity. Caleb Walker. His voice was smooth, educated, used to getting answers. That's me, and you're on my land without permission. William Carver. I'm a private investigator from Chicago. I'm looking for a woman named Evelyn Moore, also known as Evelyn Holbrook. I have reason to believe she may have come through this area. Caleb kept his expression neutral. What's your interest in her? I've been hired by her husband to locate her. She left Chicago without permission, and Mr. Holbrook is concerned for her welfare. Her welfare. Caleb let the words hang there, dripping with disbelief. Yes, he's quite worried. She's not well, you understand, fragile, prone to delusions. He simply wants to bring her home where she can receive proper care. The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that Caleb almost admired the skill of it. Almost. If someone came through here matching that description, what makes you think I'd know about it? You were seen at the stage stop when a woman matching her description arrived. You were seen in town with this same woman, and according to my sources, you recently married in a rather hasty ceremony. Carver's smile was cold. It's not hard to put the pieces together, Mr. Walker. Here's what I know, Caleb said carefully. I recently married Evelyn Walker, formerly Evelyn Moore. She's my wife, settled here on my land, and not interested in going anywhere. Evelyn Walker is still legally married to Richard Holbrook, which means your marriage is invalid and you're currently harboring another man's wife. Montana Territory might see it differently. Federal law doesn't. Carver pulled out a folded document. I have a warrant here for her return to Chicago to face charges of desertion and theft. If you're hiding her, you could be charged as an accessory. Caleb didn't reach for the paper. She didn't steal anything, and desertion's not a crime when you're running from violence. You've seen the bruises then. Carver's expression didn't change. Unfortunate accident. She fell down the stairs. Mr. Holbrook was quite distraught about it. I'm sure he was. Probably worried she'd fall again and damage his property permanently. The investigator's eyes narrowed. I can see you're not going to be reasonable about this. That's fine. I'll come back with the sheriff and proper papers, and we'll do this the hard way. But understand, Mr. Walker, one way or another, Evelyn Holbrook is going back to Chicago. You can make it easy, or you can make it difficult. The outcome will be the same. Get off my land. I'll be back. And I'll be here, with my wife, on my property, perfectly legal. Carver wheeled his horse and rode off the way he'd come, and Caleb watched until he was out of sight before allowing himself to shake. Not from fear, but from the effort of keeping his temper in check. He wanted to drag that smug investigator off his horse and show him exactly what happened to men who threatened his wife. But violence wouldn't help. Violence would just give them ammunition. He rode back to the cabin fast, finding Evelyn working in the small garden plot she'd started behind the house. She looked up at his approach, and whatever she saw in his face made her drop the trowel and stand. What happened? Carver was here, on our land, asking about you. All the color drained from her face. What did you tell him? That you're my wife and you're not going anywhere. He said he has a warrant, federal charges for desertion and theft. I didn't steal anything. I know. He's lying, or Richard is. Doesn't matter. He's going to come back with legal papers, try to force the issue. Caleb dismounted, taking her hands. We need to be smart about this. We need help. Who can help us? He has the law on his side. Maybe in Chicago, but we're in Montana, and the law here is what people make of it. Come on, we're going to town. We need to talk to Brennan, maybe get a lawyer's opinion. They rode together, Evelyn behind him on the horse, her arms tight around his waist. He could feel her trembling and wished there was something he could say to make this better. But there wasn't. All he could do was keep moving forward, keep fighting, keep protecting her the best way he knew how. Sheriff Brennan's office was empty when they arrived, but they found him at the saloon, nursing coffee and talking with a man Caleb didn't recognize. The stranger was older, silver-haired, with the careful posture of someone who'd spent years sitting at desks. Caleb, Evelyn. Brennan stood immediately. Good timing. This is Judge Elias Morton, circuit judge for the territory. He's passing through on his way to Helena. Judge, this is the couple I was telling you about. Morton studied them with sharp eyes. The mail-order bride situation with the Chicago husband? That's us, Caleb said. And we've got a problem. Investigator named Carver showed up at my ranch today claiming he has a federal warrant for Evelyn's return. On what grounds? Desertion and theft. Both false, according to my wife. Morton gestured to the empty chairs at his table. Sit. Tell me everything, and don't leave anything out. So they did. Evelyn spoke about her marriage to Richard, the escalating violence, the broken ribs that made her finally run. Caleb explained about the mail-order bride arrangement, their recent marriage, the investigator's threats. Brennan filled in details about Carver's arrival in town, his questions, the general feeling that something wasn't right about the man's story. When they finished, Morton sat back, fingers steepled under his chin. First, let me address the legal situation. In the territory of Montana, we recognize common law marriages. You've presented yourselves as husband and wife, been married in a ceremony with witnesses, and are living together as a married couple. That's valid here, regardless of what Chicago might say. But the federal warrant would need to be properly filed and served, which I doubt it has been. Carver's likely bluffing, using intimidation to force compliance. Even if there is a warrant, he'd need local law enforcement cooperation to execute it. Morton looked at Brennan. Sheriff? I'm not inclined to cooperate with someone trying to return a woman to an abusive situation, warrant or no warrant. Good. Second issue, the charges themselves. Desertion isn't a federal crime. It's barely a crime at all. As for theft, what did she allegedly steal? Nothing, Evelyn said firmly. I left with only my personal belongings, clothes, a few books, my mother's locket, nothing that belonged to Richard. Even if you had taken household items, that would be a civil matter, not criminal, and certainly not federal. Morton's expression hardened. This reeks of a wealthy man using intimidation and false legal claims to retrieve what he considers his property. I've seen it before, and it makes me angry every time. So what do we do? Caleb asked. Just wait for him to come back with the sheriff? No, we take initiative. Morton stood. I'm going to draft a statement establishing Evelyn Walker's legal residency in Montana territory, her valid marriage to you, Caleb, and the fraudulent nature of any claims made by Richard Holbrook or his agents. Sheriff Brennan will sign it as witness to your marriage and character. When Carver returns, we'll be ready with documentation of our own. Will that be enough? It should be. Federal authorities have no interest in domestic disputes, especially when the evidence suggests the husband is the one in the wrong. Carver's power comes from intimidation and the assumption that frontier law is weak. We'll show him that's not the case. For the first time since Carver's visit, Caleb felt something like hope. Thank you, Judge. We appreciate this. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when this is resolved. Morton pulled out paper and pen from his saddlebag. Now, I need you both to tell me again, in detail, about the abuse. Be specific. Dates if you remember them, injuries, witnesses if any. We're going to build a case that even a Chicago lawyer would find hard to counter. They spent the next 2 hours going through everything. Evelyn recounting things she'd probably rather forget, Caleb supporting her with his presence, an occasional touch when the memories got too hard. Morton wrote it all down in neat legal script, asking clarifying questions, pushing for details that would strengthen their position. When they finally finished, the judge read it back to them, then had them both sign. Brennan signed as witness, and Morton affixed his own seal to the bottom. "There," he said with satisfaction. "Legal documentation that Evelyn Walker is a resident of Montana Territory, married to Caleb Walker, and making allegations of severe domestic abuse against her former husband, Richard Holbrook. This goes on record with the territorial court. If Carver or anyone else tries to remove her by force, they'll be violating territorial law as well as basic human decency." "What if Richard comes himself?" Evelyn asked quietly. "What if he doesn't send hired men next time?" "Then he'll be dealing with me," Brennan said, "and with every decent man in this county who doesn't take kindly to wife-beaters." Morton nodded agreement. "The frontier may be rough, Mrs. Walker, but it has its own sense of justice. A man who harms women doesn't get much sympathy out here, regardless of how much money he has back east." They rode home as the sun was setting, the document safely tucked in Caleb's saddlebag. Evelyn was quiet, processing everything, and Caleb let her be. Sometimes silence was what you needed to make sense of things. But when they reached the cabin and dismounted, she turned to him and said, "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For bringing this trouble to your door. For making your life complicated. For—" He stopped her with a gentle hand on her cheek. "Stop. You didn't make anything complicated. Richard Holbrook did. William Carver did. All you did was survive and try to build something better. There's nothing to apologize for in that. You could have had a simple life. A quiet wife who didn't come with a past chasing her. Simple's overrated, and you're exactly the wife I need, brave enough to run, strong enough to keep going, honest enough to tell me the truth even when it's hard. That's worth fighting for, Evelyn." She leaned into his touch for just a moment, allowing herself the comfort before stepping back. "Then we fight, together." "Together," he agreed. "Always." That night, as they lay in bed in the darkness, Evelyn spoke into the quiet. "Caleb, if this goes bad, if somehow they manage to take me back, I need you to promise me something. They're not taking you back. But if they do, promise me you won't blame yourself. Promise me you'll let go and live your life." "I can't promise that. Please." "No." His voice was firm. "I'm not planning for failure, Evelyn. I'm planning to win. We have the law on our side now. We have community support, and we have each other. That's enough. It has to be enough." She was quiet for so long he thought she'd fallen asleep. Then she said so softly he almost missed it, "I'm starting to believe you. Against all logic and experience, I'm starting to believe this might actually work." "Good. Hold on to that. We're going to need it." Outside, the Montana night was vast and star-filled, indifferent to human troubles. But inside the small cabin, two people held on to hope and each other, building something strong enough to withstand whatever storm was coming. And the storm, Caleb knew, was definitely coming. The storm arrived 5 days later, not with Carver alone, but with 3 men riding in formation toward the cabin, like they owned the Montana sky itself. Caleb saw them coming from the north pasture where he'd been checking cattle, and his gut twisted with the certainty that this was it, the confrontation they'd been bracing for. He rode hard back to the cabin, finding Evelyn hanging laundry in the yard. She took one look at his face and went still, a wet sheet gripped in her hands. "They're coming," he said, dismounting in one fluid motion. 3 riders, maybe 10 minutes out. Get inside and stay there no matter what happens." "Caleb, please, Evelyn. Just this once, don't argue. Let me handle this." She nodded, dropping the sheet and moving toward the cabin, but at the door she turned back. "Don't let them take me. Whatever it costs, don't let them." "I won't. I promise you that." She disappeared inside, and Caleb positioned himself in the yard where he could see the approaching riders clearly. He'd strapped on his gun belt, though he hoped to whatever power was listening that he wouldn't need to draw. Violence would only make things worse, would give them legal grounds to arrest him and take Evelyn without interference. But if it came to that, if they tried to force their way past him, he'd do what needed doing. The three riders came into view through the cottonwoods, Carver in the lead, looking smug and certain, flanked by two men who had the hard look of hired muscle. Not lawmen, Caleb noted, not even dressed like lawmen, just thugs in nice coats. They pulled up 20 feet from where Caleb stood, and Carver's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Mr. Walker, we meet again. I believe we have business to conclude." "Don't recall having any business with you." "Don't you? I have a warrant here for the return of Evelyn Holbrook to Chicago to face legal charges. Sheriff Brennan was unavailable to assist, so I've taken matters into my own hands." He gestured to his companions. "These gentlemen are here to ensure the warrant is properly executed." Those gentlemen look more like hired guns than legal officials. "They're authorized agents working under my direction. Now, if you'll step aside, we'll collect Mrs. Holbrook and be on our way. You can avoid any unpleasantness by simply cooperating." Caleb didn't move. "That warrant you mentioned, let me see it." Carver pulled out a document and held it up, but didn't offer to hand it over. "As you can see, it's all official. Federal seal, signed by a magistrate in Illinois. Perfectly legal." "Funny thing about that," Caleb said conversationally. "I had a talk with Judge Elias Morton, circuit judge for Montana Territory. He seemed to think federal authorities have no interest in domestic disputes. He also seemed to think charges of desertion and theft in this case are fraudulent." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Carver's face. "Judge Morton has no jurisdiction over federal warrants." "Maybe not, but he does have jurisdiction over what happens in Montana Territory. And he signed documentation establishing that Evelyn Walker, that's her legal name now, is a resident here, married to me, and making allegations of severe abuse against Richard Holbrook." Caleb kept his voice steady. "So even if your warrant is real, which I doubt, you'd need local law enforcement cooperation to execute it. Sheriff Brennan's made it clear he's not cooperating with wife-beaters. Your so-called marriage is invalid. Mrs. Holbrook is already married under the laws of Illinois and the United States. Montana recognizes common law marriages. We've presented ourselves as husband and wife, been married in a witness ceremony, and are living together as a married couple. That's valid here, regardless of what Illinois thinks." Carver's pleasant mask was slipping now, frustration showing through. "You're making this very difficult, Mr. Walker. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Your choice. I choose the way where you turn around and ride back to Chicago empty-handed. Tell Richard Holbrook his wife isn't coming back. Tell him she's found a life where men don't use their fists to make a point." One of the hired men shifted in his saddle, hand moving toward his coat. Caleb's hand moved too, resting on his gun grip, not drawing, but making the threat clear. "I wouldn't. Montana's a long way from anywhere, and bodies disappear real easy out here. Nobody would even ask questions if I said you were trespassing and refused to leave peacefully." "Are you threatening us?" "I'm stating facts. This is my land, you're uninvited, and you're making threats against my wife. Self-defense is a powerful legal principle, especially in the territories." The standoff held for a long moment, tension thick enough to choke on. Then the cabin door opened and Evelyn stepped out, moving to stand beside Caleb despite his earlier order to stay inside. She was pale but composed, her chin up, every inch the lady despite the plain work dress and the lingering shadow of the bruise on her face. "William Carver," she said clearly. "I know Richard sent you. Tell him I'm not coming back. Tell him I'd rather die here in Montana than spend one more day as his property." "Mrs. Holbrook, your husband is very concerned. My name is Evelyn Walker, and I have no husband in Chicago. That man broke my ribs, blackened my eyes, and told me I deserved the pain. Whatever legal claim he thinks he has ended the day he decided I was worth less than the furniture in his house." Carver's expression hardened. "Mr. Holbrook has been very clear about the consequences of non-compliance. If you refuse to return voluntarily, he'll pursue legal channels. He'll have your marriage here annulled. He'll have Mr. Walker arrested for harboring you, and he'll see that every door in Montana closes to you. You'll have nowhere to run, no one to help you." "He can try," Evelyn said, "but I'm not alone anymore. I have a husband who treats me with respect, a community that's welcomed me, and legal documentation establishing my residency and the abuse I suffered. Let Richard bring his lawyers and his money and his legal threats. We'll be here, ready to fight. You're making a terrible mistake. No. The mistake was marrying Richard in the first place. This is the correction. Caleb felt pride surge through him at her courage, at the way she stood her ground despite her fear. He moved slightly, putting himself between her and the three men. You heard my wife. She's not going anywhere. Now get off my property before I lose my patience. Carver looked between them, calculating. Whatever he saw, their unified front, Caleb's readiness to fight, Evelyn's determination, made him recognize a losing battle. This isn't over. Mr. Holbrook has resources you can't imagine. He'll find a way. Let him try. We'll still be here. The investigator wheeled his horse, jerking the reins harder than necessary. His two companions followed, and they rode off toward town at a pace that kicked up dust and spoke of frustrated rage. Caleb watched until they disappeared from view, his hand still on his gun, his body still coiled tight with adrenaline. When he finally turned to Evelyn, she was shaking, all the courage that had held her upright draining away. He caught her as her knees buckled, holding her steady. It's all right, he murmured. They're gone. You did so well. When I heard them coming, I thought it was over. I thought they'd just take me. Never. I told you I'd protect you, and I meant it. She pulled back enough to look at him, her eyes searching his face. You would have shot them. If they'd tried to take me, you would have killed them. Yes. That would have destroyed your life. You'd have been arrested, maybe hanged. Better that than living knowing I let them take you. His voice was rough with emotion he didn't know how to express properly. I made you a promise, Evelyn. I don't break my promises. Something shifted in her expression, some wall that had been firmly in place beginning to crack. She reached up and touched his face, her palm warm against his cheek. I'm starting to understand what kind of man you are, Caleb Walker. Just a man who keeps his word. No, more than that. So much more. They stood there in the yard, holding each other, until the shaking stopped and the adrenaline faded to exhaustion. Then Caleb walked her inside, made her sit, made her drink water even though her hands were still trembling. What happens now? She asked finally. Now we wait and see what Carver does. If he's smart, he'll report back to Holbrook that this is a dead end. If he's stupid, he'll try something else. Richard doesn't give up easily. Neither do I. That evening, Sheriff Brennan rode out to check on them. He'd heard about Carver's visit from someone in town who'd seen the men riding out, and his face was grim as he listened to their account. Those two men with him weren't law enforcement, Brennan confirmed. I asked around. They're hired thugs from Denver, the kind of men you bring when you want to intimidate people. Carver's playing outside the rules now. So what do we do? Caleb asked. We document everything. If they come back, if they make any more threats, you send word to me immediately. Judge Morton's statement gives you legal protection, but we need to be ready if Holbrook escalates. Brennan looked at Evelyn. How far do you think he'll go? I don't know. I never thought he'd come this far. She wrapped her arms around herself. But Richard doesn't like losing. And me leaving, building a life without him, that's the worst kind of loss in his eyes. A public humiliation. Then we make it clear that escalation will only humiliate him more. A wealthy Chicago businessman harassing a ranch woman in Montana territory, trying to drag back a wife who's made allegations of abuse? That's not a good look. Even back east. Brennan stood. I'm going to send some telegrams, reach out to territorial authorities. The more people who know about this situation, the harder it'll be for Holbrook to operate in the shadows. After the sheriff left, Caleb and Evelyn ate dinner in near silence, both processing the day's confrontation. The food tasted like ash in Caleb's mouth, his mind still running through every moment, every choice, wondering if he'd handled it right or if he'd just made things worse. You're thinking too hard, Evelyn said softly. I can hear it from here. Just replaying it all, wondering if I should have done something different. Like what? Let them take me? She set down her fork. You did exactly what you should have done. You stood your ground, you protected me, and you didn't give them any excuse to claim you were the aggressor. That took more strength than violence would have. Didn't feel like strength. Felt like barely holding on to control. That's what strength is sometimes. Not the absence of fear or rage, but the control of it. She reached across the table, taking his hand. Thank you, Caleb, for everything you've done, everything you've risked. Her touch was different now, he noticed. Less hesitant, more willing. Like something fundamental had shifted between them during that confrontation. Like standing together against a common threat had forged a bond that weeks of careful coexistence hadn't managed. That night, when they lay in bed, Evelyn moved closer than she had before. Not quite touching, but near enough that he could feel her warmth. I'm not afraid to sleep anymore, she said into the darkness. For the first time since I left Chicago, I feel safe enough to actually rest. That's good. You need rest. So do you. You've been carrying this burden for both of us. It's not a burden. It is, though. And I want you to know I see it. I appreciate it. You didn't have to fight for me the way you have been. You could have sent me back when you learned the truth, could have saved yourself all this trouble. Evelyn, let me finish, please. She took a breath. I came here thinking marriage would be another form of captivity. A different owner, maybe kinder, but still someone who'd expect me to be property. You've shown me something different. You've shown me what partnership looks like, what respect looks like. And I want you to know that means everything to me. Caleb turned on his side to face her, though in the darkness he could barely make out her features. I don't want your gratitude. That's not why I'm doing this. I know. That's what makes it matter. You're fighting for me because you think it's right, not because you expect something in return. That's, her voice caught. That's what I needed to understand. That not all men are like Richard, that there are still good people in the world. There are. More than you might think. Maybe. But you're the one I found, and I'm starting to think that wasn't just luck. They fell asleep like that, facing each other in the darkness, something new and fragile growing between them. Not love yet, maybe, but the foundation it could be built on. Trust, respect, partnership. The things that mattered more than passion, the things that lasted when everything else faded. The next week passed in tense normalcy. Caleb worked the ranch with one eye always on the horizon, watching for riders. Evelyn threw herself into making the cabin a proper home, sewing curtains for the second window, organizing their limited possessions into something that felt lived in rather than temporary. They talked more than they had before, sharing stories about their childhoods, their hopes, their fears. My mother used to say that hard times show you who people really are, Evelyn said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. I never understood what she meant until now. It's easy to be kind when everything's going well. It's what you do when things are difficult that reveals your character. Your mother sounds wise. She was. I wish she'd lived to meet you. I think she would have approved. Even though I'm just a rancher with more land than money, especially because of that. She didn't trust wealthy men, said money had a way of rotting people from the inside out. Evelyn smiled sadly. She tried to warn me about Richard, in her way. Said he was too polished, too perfect. I didn't listen. You can't blame yourself for not seeing it. Can't I? There were signs, even before we married. Little moments of cruelty he'd brush off as jokes, times when he'd grip my arm too hard and then apologize. I ignored them because I wanted to believe in the fairy tale, the handsome man, the big house, the comfortable life. I chose comfort over caution, and I paid for it. We all make mistakes. What matters is learning from them. And have you? Made mistakes, I mean. Caleb considered this. Plenty. Came west thinking I could outrun loneliness, only to discover that isolation and loneliness are different beasts. Spent 3 years building this ranch, making it profitable, telling myself I was content. But I wasn't. I was just existing, not living. That's a mistake too in its own way. And now? Now I'm living. Scared sometimes, angry sometimes, but alive in a way I haven't been in years. You did that, Evelyn. You gave me a reason to be present instead of just going through motions. She leaned against his shoulder, a gesture that would have been unthinkable a month ago, and they watched the sky turn gold and purple together. In that moment, despite the threat hanging over them, despite the uncertainty of what tomorrow might bring, Caleb felt something close to contentment. Then, 8 days after Carver's confrontation, a telegram arrived via a rider from town. It was addressed to both of them, sent from Judge Morton in Helena, and the message was brief but significant. Received word from federal authorities. No warrant exists for E. Walker. charges fabricated. Holbrook using private investigators to circumvent legal channels. Strongly advise formal complaint if harassment continues. Morton. Evelyn read it twice, her hands shaking. No warrant. Richard made it all up. To scare you into compliance. Classic intimidation tactic. Caleb felt rage building again, cold and focused. He bet on you being too frightened to fight back, too isolated to get help. He bet wrong. Yes, he did. They took the telegram to Sheriff Brennan, who read it with grim satisfaction. This changes things. Carver and his men were operating under false pretenses. If they show up again, I can arrest them for fraud and intimidation, and Holbrook could face charges for filing false legal documents. Will he, though? Evelyn asked. A man like Richard, with his connections? Maybe not in Chicago, but he's made himself known here now, and word travels in the territories. Every sheriff and marshal from here to California will know about the wealthy man trying to terrorize his former wife. That's not the kind of reputation that plays well in the West. So it's over? Evelyn sounded like she didn't dare believe it. Maybe not over, Brennan said carefully, but you've won this round decisively. Holbrook can't use legal threats anymore without exposing his lies. And Carver's done here. If he's smart, he's already on his way back to Chicago to report his failure. They rode home with lighter hearts than they'd had in weeks. The threat wasn't completely gone. Richard Holbrook could still hire more men, could still try different tactics, but the immediate danger had passed. The lies had been exposed, the legal ground had shifted in their favor, and their community had proven willing to stand with them. That evening, Evelyn cooked a special dinner, using supplies they'd been saving for an occasion worth celebrating. They ate slowly, savoring both the food and the relief, talking about the future in ways they hadn't dared before. I want to expand the garden next spring, Evelyn said. Plant vegetables we can preserve for winter. Maybe some flowers, too, just for beauty. We could do that. There's good soil behind the cabin. And I was thinking about chickens. Mrs. Patterson said she'd help me get started with a few hens, teach me how to manage them. Chickens would be good. Fresh eggs make a difference. You're humoring me, she said, but she was smiling. I'm agreeing with you. There's a difference. He refilled her coffee. I like that you're thinking about next spring, next year, like we have time to plan. Don't we? Richard's lost his leverage. Carver's exposed as a fraud. We have legal protection and community support. For the first time, I can actually see a future here. What does that future look like to you? Evelyn was quiet for a moment, considering. Peaceful. Productive. A life where I'm valued for what I contribute, not controlled for what I represent. Children, maybe, eventually. A home that's truly ours, built on choices we both made. She met his eyes. A real marriage, Caleb. Not just a legal arrangement, but a partnership built on trust and respect, and maybe more, given time. His breath caught at the implications of maybe more. I'd like that. All of it. Even the children? I know we haven't discussed that, and I don't want to assume. I want a family, always have. Just didn't think it would happen for me until you stepped off that stage. He reached across the table, taking her hand. But I meant what I said before. We go at your pace. No pressure, no demands, just possibility. Possibility, she echoed, and the word sounded like hope. Later, as they prepared for bed, Evelyn paused in brushing her hair and turned to him. I know you've been sleeping in the barn sometimes, giving me space. You don't have to anymore, not unless you want to. I don't want to. I want to be here with you. Then stay. Just stay. That night, for the first time, she fell asleep with her head on his shoulder, her hand resting over his heart. Caleb lay awake for hours, feeling the weight and warmth of her, understanding that this was trust manifested in physical form. She was choosing vulnerability, choosing to believe he wouldn't abuse the gift she was giving him. He would die before he betrayed that trust. Morning came soft and golden, and when Evelyn woke, she didn't immediately pull away. Instead, she stayed there for a moment, adjusting to this new intimacy, before finally sitting up with a small smile. Good morning, husband. Good morning, wife. That feels different now, more real. It is real. It's been real since we spoke the words, but maybe now we're starting to believe it. She leaned down and kissed him, quick and gentle, the first kiss she'd initiated. When she pulled back, her cheeks were pink, but her eyes were clear. I'm choosing this, Caleb. Not because I have to, not because I'm afraid or desperate, but because I want to. I want you. I want this life. I want the future we're building together. Then we'll build it. One day at a time, one choice at a time, until it's everything we need it to be. Starting now? Starting now. They rose and faced the day together, no longer just two people bound by circumstance and necessity, but partners choosing each other freely. The threat from Chicago had receded, exposing the strength of what they'd built together. And though challenges would surely come, the frontier was never easy, life was never simple. They would face them the way they'd faced William Carver and Richard Holbrook's intimidation. Together, with trust and determination and the quiet courage of people who'd decided that hope was worth fighting for. The days that followed their newfound closeness felt different, touched with a lightness that neither Caleb nor Evelyn had experienced in longer than they could remember. Spring deepened into early summer, the Montana landscape transforming from tentative green to lush abundance. The garden Evelyn had spoken of became reality, neat rows of vegetables pushing up through dark soil, and Mrs. Patterson made good on her promise, arriving one morning with 6 hens in wooden crates and enough advice to fill a book. They're not complicated creatures, she said, watching Evelyn examine the birds with careful fascination. Feed them, water them, collect the eggs daily, and they'll serve you well. Treat them right, and they'll practically raise themselves. I've never kept chickens before, Evelyn admitted. In Chicago, we bought everything from shops. Well, you're not in Chicago anymore, dear. Out here, we make what we need. Mrs. Patterson smiled warmly. You're doing well, from what I hear. Tom Brennan says that investigator tucked tail and ran after Judge Morton exposed his lies. We haven't heard anything in 3 weeks. I'm starting to believe it might actually be over. Believe it. Men like Richard Holbrook are bullies at heart, and bullies back down when someone stands up to them. You stood up, Caleb stood with you, and Holbrook learned that Montana women aren't as easy to control as Chicago wives. After Mrs. Patterson left, Evelyn spent the afternoon getting the chickens settled, talking to them in the soft voice she used when she thought no one was listening. Caleb watched from the barn door, mending a bridle, and found himself smiling at the domestic scene. This was what he'd hoped for when he'd contacted the agency, not just a warm body to fill the empty cabin, but a partner who'd make this place feel like home. You're staring, Evelyn called out, catching him watching. Just appreciating the view. She laughed, and the sound was so unexpected, so genuinely joyful, that it made something in Caleb's chest expand painfully. She laughed more now, he'd noticed, smiled easier. The haunted look that had shadowed her eyes when she first arrived had faded, replaced by something that looked almost like contentment. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the light fade, Evelyn said, I got a letter today from the agency in Chicago. Caleb tensed immediately. What did it say? That they'd received an inquiry from Richard's lawyers about my whereabouts, and they declined to provide any information. They also terminated my contract with them, said it was fulfilled the day we married. She pulled the letter from her pocket, showing him the official seal. It feels final somehow, like that door is truly closed. How do you feel about that? Relieved, grateful, a little scared, if I'm honest. What if Richard doesn't give up? What if he finds another way to... Evelyn. Caleb took her hand, the gesture natural now, where it had once been tentative. We can't live in fear of what might happen. We've done everything right. Legal marriage, community support, documented evidence of abuse. If he comes after you again, he'll face consequences. Real ones. I know. I do know that logically, but fear isn't logical. No, it's not. But it also doesn't get to make our decisions anymore. We do. She squeezed his hand, then leaned her head against his shoulder. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise, I'm just stubborn. There's a difference. I'm starting to think they're the same thing. 2 weeks later, the circuit preacher finally arrived in Ashford, and word spread that he'd be performing marriages and baptisms on Sunday. Caleb and Evelyn were already married in the eyes of the community, but Evelyn had mentioned wanting a church ceremony, something that felt more permanent than Henderson's rushed wedding in the yard. I know it's probably silly, she'd said. We're already legally bound, such as it is, but I'd like to speak vows in front of people, with intention and time to really mean the words. The first wedding felt like survival. I want this one to feel like choice. So on Sunday morning, they dressed in their best clothes and rode to town together. The small church was fuller than Caleb had ever seen it, people coming from miles around to hear Reverend Walsh preach and to witness the marriages he'd perform afterward. When their turn came, Caleb and Evelyn stood at the front of the church, facing each other with sunlight streaming through the plain glass windows. Reverend Walsh was a kind-faced man in his 60s who'd been riding the circuit for 30 years. He looked at them both with understanding eyes before beginning. Marriage is a covenant between two people, a promise to walk through life together in good times and bad. Caleb Walker and Evelyn Walker, you've already begun this journey. Today, you reaffirm that commitment before your community and the divine. Are you ready? We are, they said together. Caleb, do you take Evelyn to be your wife, to love and cherish, to support and respect, through whatever trials may come, for as long as you both shall live? Caleb looked into Evelyn's eyes, seeing the woman who'd arrived broken and afraid, who'd slowly become someone strong and whole. I do. With everything I am, I do. And Evelyn, do you take Caleb to be your husband, to love and cherish, to support and respect, through whatever trials may come, for as long as you both shall live? I do. Her voice was clear, certain. I choose this freely, with my whole heart. I do. Then by the authority granted to me, I reaffirm your union. You are husband and wife, bound not just by law, but by love freely given. May you build a life of joy and purpose together. This time when Caleb kissed her, it was deeper, more meaningful than that first chaste brush of lips. This was the kiss of two people who'd fought for each other, who'd chosen each other not once but repeatedly, who'd built something real from the ashes of what came before. The congregation clapped, and Mrs. Patterson was crying openly, and Sheriff Brennan looked satisfied in the way of a man who'd helped make something right in the world. They signed the church registry together, Evelyn's hand steady as she wrote Evelyn Walker in clear script, and it felt like closing one chapter and opening another. The celebration afterward was simple but genuine, people bringing food to share, musicians pulling out fiddles and guitars, children running wild in the churchyard while their parents talked and laughed. Evelyn was pulled into conversations with other ranch wives, women who'd made similar journeys west, who understood the challenges of building a life on the frontier. Caleb watched her bloom under the genuine acceptance, watched her realize she wasn't alone anymore. You did good, Walker, Brennan said, appearing at his elbow with 2 cups of punch. She's good people, and you two are good together. We are. Took me by surprise, honestly. I expected an arrangement, got a partnership instead. That's how the best marriages start. Low expectations, high effort, and the willingness to let something real develop. Brennan sipped his punch. You heard anything more from Chicago? Nothing. 3 weeks of silence. I'm hoping that means Holbrook's given up. Could be. Judge Morton's been making noise in the right circles, letting people know what kind of man Holbrook is. Hard to maintain a respectable reputation when word spreads that you beat your wife badly enough that she ran halfway across the continent to escape you. Social pressure might work better than legal threats. Often does, especially with wealthy men who care about appearances. Holbrook's learning that the frontier has its own rules, and money doesn't buy the same kind of power out here. As the afternoon wore on, Caleb found himself dancing with his wife. Actual dancing, clumsy and laughing because neither of them was particularly skilled, but joyful in the way of people who were simply happy to be together. Evelyn's face was flushed, her eyes bright, and when she stumbled and he caught her, she looked up at him with such open affection that it took his breath away. I love you, she said, and the words seemed to surprise her as much as him. I didn't think I could feel this way again. Didn't think I'd ever trust anyone enough. But I do. I love you, Caleb Walker. I love you too, he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. I think I have since the day you stood up to Carver, so brave and fierce despite your fear. You're remarkable, Evelyn. We're remarkable, she corrected. Together, we're something neither of us could be alone. They rode home as the sun was setting, tired but happy. And that night there was no hesitation, no careful distance. They came together as husband and wife in truth, the final barrier between them falling away with tenderness and trust. It wasn't perfect, fumbling and awkward in places, learning each other's bodies the way they'd learned each other's hearts. But it was real, and it was theirs. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Evelyn traced patterns on Caleb's chest and said, "I never thought I'd feel safe like this. Vulnerable, but safe. It's a gift, what you've given me. You gave me the same thing, purpose, partnership, a reason to be more than just a man surviving alone. We saved each other, didn't we? I think maybe we did." Summer deepened, the ranch thriving under their combined efforts. Caleb worked the cattle and the land while Evelyn managed the garden, the chickens, and the endless domestic tasks that kept a household running. But it wasn't the division of labor that defined them. It was the way they supported each other, the way Caleb would help with canning when the vegetables came in heavy, the way Evelyn would ride out to bring him lunch when he was working distant fence lines. Partnership in action, not just in theory. Then, 6 weeks after their church wedding, a letter arrived. Not from Richard or his lawyers, but from a woman named Catherine Holbrook, Richard's sister. Evelyn's hands shook as she opened it, Caleb standing close in silent support. The letter was brief and surprisingly sympathetic. "Dear Evelyn, I hope this letter finds you well and safe. I'm writing to inform you that Richard has withdrawn his efforts to locate you." After Judge Morton's communications reached certain members of Chicago society, including several of Father's business associates, Richard faced significant social and professional consequences for his treatment of you. Several contracts were canceled, and Father threatened to cut Richard from the family business unless he ceased his pursuit. Richard has agreed, though with poor grace. He's telling people you died of illness while traveling, which allows him to save face while leaving you free to live your life. I know this doesn't undo the harm he caused you, but I hope it provides some closure. I'm sorry I didn't see his cruelty sooner. Sorry I didn't help you when you needed it. Be well, Evelyn. You deserve happiness. Yours, Catherine. Evelyn read it twice, then handed it to Caleb with trembling hands. It's over, really over. Richard's given up. Because it cost him too much to keep fighting, just like we thought it would. I can barely believe it. She sank into a chair, all the tension she'd been carrying for months suddenly releasing. I'm free. Truly free. He can't touch me anymore. Caleb knelt beside her, taking her hands. How do you feel? Like I can finally breathe all the way. Like the future isn't something to fear anymore, but something to look forward to. Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling. We won, Caleb. We actually won. You won. You were brave enough to run, strong enough to keep going, courageous enough to trust me when you had every reason not to. This victory is yours. Ours, she corrected firmly. Everything is ours now. They celebrated quietly that evening, just the two of them, talking about plans for the winter, for next spring, for the years stretching ahead of them. Evelyn wanted to learn to ride better, wanted to be useful during roundup. Caleb wanted to expand the herd, maybe hire some help come fall. They talked about children, when, how many, what kind of life they'd build for them, with the freedom of people who finally believed they had time. Autumn came golden and glorious, the cottonwoods turning yellow, the air crisp with the promise of winter ahead. They worked together to prepare the ranch for cold weather, cutting firewood, preserving food, making sure the barn and cabin were tight against the wind. Evelyn proved surprisingly skilled at practical tasks, her hands quick and capable, whether she was mending clothes or helping Caleb shoe a horse. My mother insisted I learn practical skills, she explained one day as she competently cleaned a chicken for dinner. Said fine ladies who couldn't take care of themselves were helpless, and helplessness was dangerous for women. I didn't appreciate the lessons then, but I'm grateful now. She was a wise woman. She was. I wish you could have met her. I think she would have liked you very much. I would have liked her too, if she raised someone like you. By the time the first snow fell in late November, the ranch was ready. They'd laid in supplies, reinforced the chicken coop, moved the cattle to winter pasture. And on a cold December morning, Evelyn woke with news that would change everything. I'm pregnant, she said simply, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. I wasn't sure at first, but now I am. We're going to have a baby. Caleb's response was wordless. He simply pulled her into his arms and held her, feeling the magnitude of this gift, this proof of the life they'd built together. A child conceived in love and trust, who would grow up knowing only safety and warmth, who would never see violence or cruelty in their home. "Are you happy?" Evelyn asked, pulling back to see his face. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. Grateful, awed, terrified in the best possible way. He touched her face gently. "We're going to be parents." "We are. And our child is going to know what a real man looks like, what love is supposed to be. They'll grow up with kindness and respect as their foundation, not fear. They'll have the best mother anyone could ask for, and the best father." Winter was hard, as Montana winters always were, but they faced it together. The cabin stayed warm, the supplies held out, and Evelyn bloomed with pregnancy despite the occasional morning sickness. Mrs. Patterson came by when weather allowed, bringing knowledge and reassurance, helping Evelyn prepare for what was coming. "You'll do fine," she said confidently. "You're strong, and you've got a good man supporting you. That makes all the difference." Spring came slowly, reluctantly, the snow melting in fits and starts, and on a warm April day, almost exactly a year after Evelyn had first stepped off that stagecoach, she gave birth to a daughter. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Caleb feared he might lose them both. But Evelyn was as strong in childbirth as she'd been in everything else, and when the baby finally came, her cry was loud and indignant and absolutely perfect. "She's beautiful," Caleb said, holding his daughter for the first time, overwhelmed by the tiny weight of her, the reality of this new life they'd created. "She's absolutely perfect." "What should we name her?" Evelyn asked, exhausted but radiant. "I was thinking Catherine, after your mother, and after the woman who wrote that letter that freed you." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "Catherine Walker. Yes, that's perfect." In the days that followed, Caleb learned what it meant to be a father. The sleepless nights, the constant worry, the overwhelming love that made every sacrifice worthwhile. He learned how to change diapers, how to rock a crying baby to sleep, how to support Evelyn as she recovered and learned to nurse. They stumbled through it together, making mistakes and learning from them, building their family one day at a time. Summer came again, and with it neighbors stopping by to meet the new baby, to bring gifts and advice and congratulations. The Morrison family from 5 miles south, with all 6 of their children crowding around to see the baby. Mrs. Patterson with clothes her own grandchildren had outgrown. Sheriff Brennan with a hand-carved rattle and an awkward but genuine blessing. And through it all, Caleb and Evelyn grew deeper into each other, their love maturing from the desperate hope of early days into something solid and enduring. They learned each other's moods, each other's needs, the 1,000 small ways that partners support and strengthen each other. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching Catherine sleep in her cradle, Evelyn said, "Do you remember when I first arrived? How terrified I was, how certain this would just be another cage. I remember. You looked like you might bolt at any second. I almost did those first few days. I kept thinking about running, about finding some other place to hide, but you gave me a reason to stay. You showed me what it felt like to be respected, to be valued as a person instead of property. You did the same for me, showed me what it felt like to be needed, to matter to someone. We were both so broken when we found each other." "Were," Caleb agreed. "Past tense. We're not broken anymore." "No," Evelyn said softly, watching their daughter sleep, safe and loved and whole. "We're not broken. We're home." And they were. The ranch that had once been Caleb's lonely outpost had become a home filled with laughter and purpose. The cabin that had echoed with silence now rang with baby sounds and conversation and the comfortable quiet of people who didn't need words to communicate. Years passed, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and family. Catherine grew from infant to toddler to little girl, bright and curious and fearless in the way of children who'd never known fear in their own home. 2 years after Catherine came a son they named Thomas, after Caleb's father, and 2 years after that, another daughter named Sarah. The ranch expanded as Caleb had hoped, the herd growing, the land producing, prosperity coming not as a windfall, but as the result of hard work and careful planning. They hired help during busy seasons, and Caleb taught the neighboring boys how to handle cattle in exchange for their labor. Evelyn became known in the community as someone you could count on for help with difficult births, for nursing the sick, for practical advice and genuine friendship. They never heard from Richard Holbrook again. According to occasional letters from Catherine, he'd remarried, chosen a more compliant woman who wouldn't challenge his authority. The news should have bothered Evelyn, but it didn't. That part of her life felt like it had happened to someone else, in a different world, in a time so distant it barely seemed real. What was real was this: the ranch spread out before them, the children playing in the yard, the chickens Evelyn still tended with careful attention, the garden that produced more than they could use so they shared with neighbors, the life they'd built from nothing but hope and determination and the willingness to trust each other. On a fall evening, 10 years after that first stagecoach arrival, Caleb and Evelyn sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson. Catherine was 12 now, helping her mother with the younger children. Thomas was 8, already showing signs of becoming a natural cattleman. Sarah was 6, wild and sweet and completely fearless. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't written to that agency?" Evelyn asked, her hand in his the way it had been for thousands of evenings before. "Sometimes, but not with regret. Everything I did, every choice I made, led me to you, led us to this. I can't regret the path that brought me home. Even the hard parts, the fear and the fighting and the uncertainty. Especially those parts. They taught us what we were made of. They proved we could survive anything as long as we faced it together." Together, Evelyn echoed, the word that had become their foundation, their promise, their truth. Always together. The sun sank below the horizon, and the stars began to appear, brilliant against the darkening sky. Inside the house, their children laughed over some shared joke, and from the barn came the peaceful sounds of livestock settling for the night. The land stretched around them, vast and beautiful, and theirs, not just in the legal sense of ownership, but in the deeper sense of belonging. This was what they'd built from a desperate arrangement and a leap of faith. This was what grew when two broken people chose to trust each other, to hope for better, to work toward a future worth having. Not a fairy tale, not a rescue, but a partnership forged in mutual respect and hard-won trust. On the Montana frontier, where survival was never guaranteed and easy lives were fairy tales, Caleb and Evelyn Walker had created something rare and precious. They'd built a home where love replaced fear, where partnership replaced control, where 3 children grew up knowing they were wanted and cherished and safe. They'd taken the broken pieces of their separate pasts and forged them into something whole. They'd proved that hope, however fragile, was worth fighting for. And they'd shown that sometimes the best things in life came not from perfect plans, but from the courage to begin again, to trust again, to love again, despite every reason to protect your heart. The night settled around them, familiar and peaceful, and Caleb pulled Evelyn closer, her head resting on his shoulder the way it had 1,000 times before. Tomorrow would bring work and challenges and the endless demands of ranch life. But tonight, there was just this: 2 people who'd found each other against all odds, who'd chosen each other freely, who'd built a life worth living. "I love you," Caleb said into the darkness. "I love you too," Evelyn answered, "more than I ever thought possible. More than words can say." And in that simple exchange, in the quiet peace of their evening together, was everything that mattered. Not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but the steady, enduring love of 2 people who'd walked through fire together and come out stronger on the other side. The letter that had arrived on that long-ago Tuesday had promised nothing but possibility. The woman who'd stepped off the stagecoach had carried nothing but fear and desperate hope. The man who'd stood waiting had wanted nothing more than to not be alone. From those humble beginnings, from that uncertain start, they'd built something that would last not just their lifetimes, but would echo in their children and grandchildren, in the land they'd tended, in the community they'd served. They'd created a legacy not of wealth or fame, but of love freely given and faithfully kept. And as the stars wheeled overhead and the Montana night wrapped around them like a familiar blanket, Caleb and Evelyn Walker sat together in the home they'd made, the life they'd chosen, and knew with absolute certainty that they'd found what they'd both been searching for all along. Not rescue, not escape, but home. True home, where 2 people stood together and faced the world as one. where past wounds healed and future possibilities bloomed, where every day was a choice to love and be loved in return. It was everything, and it was enough.